short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime.
Yesterday, Iran's parliament did approve a plan to close the Strait of Hormuz, which would block $1 billion of oil shipments per day. This is Iranian retaliation.
On any given morning, the fate of the global economy floats through a narrow stretch of water between Iran and Oman. The Strait of Hormuz may look unremarkable on a map, but it carries the economic lifeblood of nations, nearly 20 million barrels of oil daily, representing 1/5 of global production. This waterway is more than a shipping route. It's a geopolitical weapon. Iran knows that with a few well-placed naval mines or a coordinated missile strike, it could trigger the most severe energy crisis in modern history. The shipping lanes are barely 2 miles wide in each direction. There are no alternatives. Every major economy on Earth depends on this single choke point remaining open. Iran is threatening to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, and the implications are absolutely staggering. The Iranian Parliament has recently approved a measure to close this critical waterway, though the final decision rests with the country's Supreme National Security Council. This is not just political posturing, it's Iran wielding the most powerful form of economic leverage available to any nation in the modern world. The current crisis has escalated dramatically following Israel's preemptive strikes on Iranian facilities. These attacks eliminated high-ranking Iranian generals and nuclear scientists, struck major fuel depots, ignited enormous fires at critical oil refineries, and even hit Iran's prized South Pars gas field, one of the largest natural gas production facilities in the world. Iran is naturally furious, and given these severe blows, it may soon feel it has little choice but to finally follow through on its long-standing threats. If Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, the consequences for the global economy would be immediate and would be catastrophic. J.P. Morgan is projecting that oil prices could hit $130 per barrel in a worst-case scenario. But if the strait stays closed for an extended period, prices could climb much higher. Here's the terrifying reality. If oil prices rise above $100 per barrel and stay there, it will immediately push the global economy into recession. If prices rise above $200 per barrel and remain elevated, it'll trigger a worldwide economic depression. We are not talking about market volatility. We're talking about the complete disruption of the foundation upon which modern civilization operates. About 20% of global oil and gas flow through this narrow passage, which lies between Oman and Iran. The shipping lanes through the strait are even more constrained, less than 2 miles wide in each direction, making them extremely vulnerable to disruption. Asia would suffer the most devastating consequences from any Hormuz closure. The continent's economic powerhouses have built their entire industrial foundation on Middle Eastern energy supplies flowing through this single choke point. China faces the greatest vulnerability, as its massive manufacturing economy depends heavily on Persian Gulf crude. Asian nations have deliberately concentrated their energy partnerships in the Gulf region, creating dangerous over-reliance on this one shipping route. Without these critical supplies, the continent's interconnected economies would experience cascading failures, from factory shutdowns in China to power grid instabilities across Southeast Asia, potentially triggering widespread social unrest. Europe would not escape unscathed. The continent imports substantial amounts of oil and liquefied natural gas from Gulf producers. Qatar alone provides over 20% of Europe's LNG supply, all of which must pass through the strait. Major European economies such as Germany, France, and Italy would face sudden energy shortages and spiraling costs. Even in the United States, which has become far more energy independent in recent years, would not be immune to the chaos. While America produces much of its own oil and purchases less than 3% of the oil coming out of the Persian Gulf, a global crisis of this magnitude would immediately send prices soaring worldwide. The crisis would extend far beyond petroleum. Transportation costs would immediately rise, making daily commutes and shipping far more expensive. Electricity prices would skyrocket, making it much harder to power homes and to power businesses. Higher fuel costs would directly spike prices for food, medicine, and all the basic items we need to survive. Perhaps most concerning is the impact on fertilizer production and distribution. Iran was the third largest urea exporter in 2024, with export volumes of around 4.5 million tons. A tremendous amount of fertilizer travels through the Strait of Hormuz, and disrupting these shipments could trigger famines in many areas of the planet. With many countries' economies already fragile, a crisis of this magnitude could become the financial death sentence they cannot afford. Smaller, economically vulnerable nations, especially those already on the brink of collapse like Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Lebanon, Egypt, would be devastated. Iran has been preparing for this scenario for decades. The country possesses multiple ways to effectively shut down the Strait of Hormuz, and their capabilities are genuinely frightening. The simplest and most devastating tactic would be laying naval mines. Iran could rapidly scatter hundreds of these weapons directly into the tight shipping lanes. Just the threat alone would stop tanker traffic overnight. No captain would risk sailing a 300,000-ton supertanker through a minefield. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps operates fleets of speedboats that can swarm larger ships. Armed with rockets, heavy machine guns, and explosives, these nimble boats can quickly weave between massive tankers and naval vessels, causing chaos within seconds. Beyond speedboats and mines, Iran has positioned an arsenal of powerful anti-ship missiles, aerial and naval drones, and submarines along its coastline. Missiles can be truck-mounted and hidden among coastal cliffs, then fired accurately at ships dozens of miles offshore. Any attempt by Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz would immediately trigger a massive international response. The United States has effectively staked its international credibility on keeping Hormuz open since the Carter Doctrine of 1980, when President Jimmy Carter explicitly warned that any hostile force trying to block the Persian Gulf would be treated as a direct assault on vital American interests and repelled by force if necessary. The United States maintains a powerful naval presence through the Fifth Fleet, stationed in Bahrain, specifically to ensure Hormuz remains open. If Iran attempts to close the strait, American warplanes would likely unleash devastating strikes on Iranian naval facilities, coastal missile launches, Revolutionary Guard speedboat docks, radar sites, and drone bases. This could quickly escalate into an all-out international war. NATO could become involved if Iran's actions threaten European forces or vessels. Iran would likely retaliate by targeting U.S. military bases across the Gulf, launching massive barrages at American assets in Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, the UAE, and Oman. China faces a nightmare scenario in any Hormuz crisis. Beijing isn't exactly friends with Iran, but it's a crucial strategic partner, especially in terms of buying Iranian oil despite Western sanctions. However, China also maintains close ties with major Gulf states, importing even larger volumes of oil from Saudi Arabia and the UAE. China's domestic oil resources aren't nearly enough to sustain its gigantic economy, and its strategic reserves could cover only a short disruption. Without Gulf oil, China faces industrial shutdowns, economic collapse, and domestic unrest. Initially, Beijing would probably try diplomacy, but if Iran moves forward aggressively, China could find itself pressuring Iran not to push things further. In an extreme scenario, China might deploy warships to escort Chinese-flagged oil tankers, potentially leading to dangerous standoffs with United States forces. Perhaps most concerning is how a Hormuz crisis could create opportunities for other conflicts. If America suddenly finds itself deep in a Middle East crisis, forced to send critical military resources toward Iran and the Persian Gulf, this would dramatically reduce U.S. military presence in the Pacific. China could see this global distraction as an extraordinary opportunity to finally pursue one of its most fiercely guarded goals. You got it, retaking Taiwan. With America's military stretched thin and distracted, Beijing might decide now is the time to launch the invasion or blockade it's been preparing for. The devastating Iran-Iraq conflict of the 1980s provides a chilling preview of what the Hormuz closure could unleash. Both nations weaponized the Persian Gulf's shipping lanes, turning commercial vessels into targets regardless of their nationality. The resulting tanker war saw sophisticated missile attacks against massive oil carriers, while speedboat swarms deployed naval mines that turned the Gulf into a floating graveyard. International intervention came only after hundreds of ships were damaged and countless sailors killed. This historical precedent taught Iran a crucial lesson. While it possesses enormous leverage through Hormuz, using that leverage invites catastrophic retaliation that could destroy the country itself. As of this moment, Iran has not closed the Strait of Hormuz. Everything we've explored represents a worst-case scenario, a detailed look at how quickly and dangerously things could spiral out of control. The reality is that closing Hormuz would be economic suicide for Iran as well. The country relies on the strait to export nearly all of its remaining oil and import critical supplies, including essential food and medicine. It would also risk losing China, one of its strongest diplomatic backers, if Beijing's economy were devastated by the resulting crisis. But when senior Iranian figures openly float this threat in public, when the regime feels cornered and under existential threat, we simply can't afford to rule it out. If Iran's supreme leader genuinely believes he might be the next target, he may feel pushed to a point of desperation where delivering a catastrophic final blow seems his only remaining option, even if it means dragging the region and potentially the entire world down with him. Our way of life depends on cheap energy. Remove cheap energy from the equation, and our society will be thrown into chaos. There is no doubt about that at all. The Iranians know that closing the Strait of Hormuz is one of the most powerful forms of leverage any nation possesses in the modern world, because our civilization is deeply dependent on the oil that travels through that waterway. The phrase World War III carries enormous weight and shouldn't be used lightly. But when multiple nuclear-armed powers could face off directly over this critical chokepoint, when a single miscalculation could rapidly spark global conflict, when the economic foundations of modern society hang in the balance, we must take these threats seriously. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz wouldn't just be a regional crisis or even a global economic downturn. It would be a catastrophe that would reshape the world order, potentially triggering the most serious international crisis since World War II. in our interconnected world where energy security underpins everything from food production to global trade, the Strait of Hormuz represents both our greatest vulnerability and the flashpoint that could determine the course of the 21st century. Now that missiles are flying and bombs are being dropped, there may be no going back to the way things were. The world is watching, waiting, and hoping that cooler heads will prevail before we find out just how catastrophic this nightmare scenario could become. Please subscribe to Epic Economist and thank you for watching.